This interview is about One Health research combining climate science, marine biology, and the expertise and traditional knowledge of local Arctic communities along the coast. I'm joined by Alaska climate specialist Rick Thoman in Fairbanks and marine biologist Professor Gay Sheffield in Nome.
My name is Gay Sheffield. I'm with University of Alaska Fairbanks, Alaska Sea Grant/Marine Advisory Program. I live and work and serve the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples.
I am Rick Thoman. I work for the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Preparedness, which is one of the groups within the International Arctic Research Center on the UAF campus here in Fairbanks. My role here is the Alaska and Arctic climate specialist. I spent more than 30 years with the Weather Service in the Alaska region. The part-time part lasted about 2 weeks. So now I just say I changed jobs in 2018. But really, the state is, and the Arctic is my remit, and I spend a lot of time, what I like to refer to as the translator function, listening to what people, tribes, individuals, organizations say they need for weather, climate, environmental information. And then I go back to the cupboard of Western science and, okay, what do we have here that could help this group with what they have identified as something that's important to them? Sometimes Western science has something. Sometimes, of course, it doesn't. But that's one of the roles that I play, and that's the biggest role I play in Western Alaska, especially.
Gay Sheffield and Rick Thoman, thank you both so much for joining me this morning to talk to One Health epidemiology students about your work. Rick, a question for you. Can you explain what climate monitoring and climate modeling are and how they're used in epidemiology?
Climate monitoring is basically what's happening in the environment now, whether it's ocean temperatures, sea ice conditions. Then the climate part comes in. Put that in some context, historical context. Is this more ice or less ice than we would expect to have at this time of year? Or water temperatures warmer, cooler, or about what we would expect? That's mostly done through remote sensing, typically satellite-derived information. Obviously, there's lots of value if every day for the next 50 years you go out and measure the ocean temperature at the pier off your home. That would be great too. But for scale, this is all from remote monitoring. In Alaska, especially outside of the Gulf of Alaska, there is hardly any in situ measurements of things like ocean temperatures. Literally, you can count them on one hand from Bristol Bay to Koktovik. That's climate monitoring in 30 seconds. What's the conditions now of whatever you're interested in, and how does that compare to expectations? Climate modeling would be typically, okay, how are things going to look in the future beyond the weather scale? So climate modeling could involve next month's average conditions. It could involve next century's average conditions. Most of those are physically based models, and you start with some initial conditions, whatever it is, say, right now, and then you let the model that has the physics in that code and let that run forward. Now, for long-term climate modeling, of course, you have to make some assumptions in any given model. Not just the physics, of course, won't change, but what will people do? So what will be greenhouse gas emissions in 50 years? You have to make some decision about that kind of thing. So there's uncertainties in both the physical modeling and then in those long-term projections, things that can't come out of physical models, like what will people be doing at the global scale?
Your research has involved people from various disciplines and diverse backgrounds. Can you speak to the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration in One Health research?
It's key. I live in Nome in the Bering Strait region. We are surrounded by experts in the marine ecosystem, land ecosystem, health of animals, the weather. And I think Rick brought it up about that communication and translation so that we're bringing together every perspective, that One Health perspective, ecosystem-based. Rural Alaska, that's everything, the ecosystem-based approach. In the Bering Strait region, I'm just going to talk about the ocean here. We have comprehensive utilization of the marine ecosystem. Comprehensive. If you know how to make a boat out of skin of a walrus, you know something about walrus skin. Everything is utilized. So there is a vast expertise of knowledge out here. A lot of the Western science, which is typically urban-based, not always, but typically urban-based, with their expertise in this case, analyzing feces of a whale for algal toxins, that's not something we can do in Utqiagvik or Nome. And that expertise lies elsewhere. But the expertise involved in acquiring a healthy bowhead whale, the process, both the federal permitting, co-management protocols, borough government protocols, tribal protocols, and all the information that comes in from each one of those, it's comprehensive. And that's just to get a little bit of material to an expert in an urban-based setting who is awesome. They're doing this amazing work, which is telling a story that is incredibly important for us to hear.
As Gay's pointed out, the ability to ethically access this 20 years of whale samples from North Slope Borough is only possible by going through and working together with all the entities that Gay has outlined. So that's just to get the samples. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gay. In the US, that's the only kind of archive of organic materials like that.
For fresh, dead cetaceans, it's very rare. Mostly the country's dealing with, dead, stranded, or compromised animals, sick and dying, that kind of thing.
So working with all of those groups, going through the appropriate channels in the appropriate time, in the appropriate way, we got access to this unique data set. So Kathy LaFay, the lead on this, brought together this completely diverse array of people from Northwest Alaska, people, people with expertise in algae, people with expertise in toxin, physical oceanographers, whale experts, and then me, the climate person. And all of that was necessary to tell a tale, tell the story that no one subgroup could have told. 20 years of whale samples could have been interpreted many different ways, but it required this interdisciplinary, very interdisciplinary. I mean, here's what I know about epidemiology. Nothing, exactly nothing, right? I'm a climate guy. But the physical oceanographers, the climate, the biology people, the algae people, all of this was necessary to come together in a very collaborative way to each contribute their own piece to be able to tell this greater story. And I think somewhat overused maybe, but I think it really is a result that's bigger than the sum of its parts.
The data set spans 19 years of whale feces samples. Can you explain why having specimens over such a long time period is so valuable in epidemiology?
It's an incredible 2 decades of being able, at a time when we've had incredible shifts in our marine ecosystem. It's just an impressive data set, and it's an incredible story that the whales are telling, in this case, through the harvest and through the science of this harmful algal bloom exposure. You wouldn't get that. I don't think we've had the finances as a country. Certainly, we haven't had ships every year for 20 years sampling for harmful algal blooms, but here the whales have been able to provide that story and that data through this examination and collection of their tissues.
You also used water temperatures, wind, and other types of data. How is combining multiple sources of data helpful for your research?
The algae species that potentially will produce these toxins, in this case, Alexandrium catenella, they require some minimum ocean temperature to be active. And so having that information is important. Physical oceanography has changed dramatically in the last 2 decades. Started before that, of course, but it's really picked up speed in the 21st century. So dramatically decreased summer and autumn sea ice. With that, of course, comes increased ocean temperatures. Being able to have that physical ocean data or ice data, climate data writ large, is an important signal for the potential occurrence of this. And that's the role that I played in this paper, is supplying that longer term data sets for sea ice and for sea surface temperatures and also some wind information as well. But all of that is necessary to connect that back to this particular toxin that requires some minimum physical conditions in order to do its thing.
Rick gave a great answer there. I would say on the same scale, we've had massive shifts in the northern Bering Sea ecosystem where I live, massive shifts. Rick is able to bring in that the why, the water's getting warmer, the ice, what is that? Then there's the biology, and then there's the whole marine ecosystem now, and all that means in a One Health way. That's not just the animals, that's the people too. We are all under pressure from this high variation of sea ice. Are we going to have enough cold water to keep our ecosystem intact? Or is this going to be one of these warm years? And here comes the kind of the invaders from the south. In the northern Bering Sea, in the Bering Strait region, except for a few fish species, all the marine mammals, like all the whales, are federally managed, right? And we have no service out here. So it's very hard for people in the federal side of the house, given their funding, given their location, to be able to capture all this all the time. And that's where you're using everything you've got to make as complete a story as possible. That's that interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. What is the definition of One Health? I mean, can you give us that?
It is the interconnectedness of human health, animal health, and environmental health. And the idea that the three are integrally linked and you can't separate out one from the others.
So in the case of Western and Northern Alaska, animal health is integral to human health. The health of these whales, the health of the water, the health of what the whales are eating. All of that because we have the maritime subsistence utilization, which I say is comprehensive, that human health and animal health are so aligned. And that is how this project kind of reflects that One Health perspective.
Specifically in this region, can you speak more to the importance of the link between ocean temperatures warming and climate change and harmful algal blooms and recent whale strandings?
In many ways, kind of the precursor to this paper was actually a meeting in Nome that Gay hosted at Northwest Campus in the summer of 2019, specifically to talk about harmful algal bloom. And in the northern Bering Sea, southern Chukchi Sea region, this, at least historically, had not been a concern. Of course, harmful algal bloom, paralytic shellfish poisoning has been an issue forever, say in Southeast Alaska. But in the Bering Sea, it was much less of an issue. Now, there's some evidence that long ago, there's some place name evidence, for instance, near Shishmaref that suggests that had occurred, that paralytic shellfish poisoning event had occurred. But people just in the northern Bering Sea region were not used to thinking about paralytic shellfish poisoning and what it might mean, what it would look like from a human health perspective. And so that brought together all of many different disciplines in the Western science view and people from the region all in one place. And that, I think, really sparked some of the collaborations that eventually led to this paper. And then subsequent to that, there was a happenstance research crews detected the highest levels of the Alexandrium ever recorded in U.S. waters. And it's come to the fore because we see clearly that ocean temperatures now are basically every summer now are reaching levels that will support the growth of the Alexandrium and these toxins. And that is very different than the 20th century, when water temperatures warm enough to support that growth were rare or never occurred, depending where you're at.
So we've always had the Alexandrium come up because water moves, for the most part, water is headed north in the Bering Sea. But like Rick says, the water's been too cold for it to have that bloom. So it's not new to the animals, it's not new to us, but that uncontrolled growth, when it hits just the right conditions, it's a combination. They're still trying to figure out what sparks it to have a bloom, which is just uncontrolled growth. And Rick's right. In 2022, we had the largest, most massive, so from St. Lawrence Island in the Bering Strait up to the northeast Chukchi, the most persistent for over 2.5 months. And the cell count was extraordinary, 150,000 cells of Alexandrium per liter. And the toxin, this Alexandria makes a suite of toxins, some not so bad, some very bad, all the way up to really you don't want to see saxitoxin that will get you to paralytic shellfish poisoning if you ingest too much of it. And it was the most toxic bloom the country had ever documented nationwide. We had a series of local events where people turned in some animals. They were concerned of the behavior of the animal, a walrus in particular. And it turned out in 2017, that walrus in his feces, working with the researcher who does the bowhead feces analysis, it was 5 times over the seafood safety limit. That was brought to our attention by the communities out here who could see through the lens of food security, food safety, and expertise in walruses. Something was not right here, and they needed to find out what it was. So we brought in the state epidemiologist, and some of his staff, I think, came, and they did a training. We spent one day training the hospital on this. He gave a formal training to the EMS staff, the ER staff, and the clinics. So we have a series of clinics, 14 coastal communities here in the Bering Strait region, and the clinics could tune in if they wanted. That was 6 years ago. I look back, I was in the hospital unexpectedly recently, in the ER unexpectedly recently, and I was thinking, oh gosh, I need to talk to them about right now we're having elevated sea surface temperatures near Nome, and I wanted to double check. They are actually tracking that. He's like, we're on it. We've been watching these elevated water temperatures. They had just done a training on botulism, which has a lot of similar symptoms and is a problem here in the Bering Strait region, can be. And it has a lot of similar symptoms to paralytic shellfish poisoning. And they were fully aware and watching these water temperatures and thinking about the possibility for someone coming in and presenting with paralytic shellfish poisoning. And I thought, wow, here now our Norton Sound Health Consortium is actually tracking or trying to get information on the sea surface temperatures. And I think little baby steps and that One Health perspective on how rural Alaska and urban-based Alaska and everybody communicating as a team, the climate data that Rick's producing, they're watching that in the hospital, and they're thinking about paralytic shellfish poisoning, which 10 years ago, I don't think that was even a thought. In 2016, so prior to any of the workshop, prior to the data results, prior to the bloom, a gentleman from Wales, which is a remote community right in the Bering Strait, wrote me a handwritten letter. He had read the Nome Nugget story, and he was thinking about this algal bloom, and he recalled, if I could find the correct book, there was a place where he thought we had this before, and he thought, he's gone now, he thought this topic of algal blooms was something that we knew in the past. And sure enough, he was right on target. I found the book he was looking for. There is a place name that describes several people dying during a, quote, red tide event. And that's something we have not really done very well at all from this side of the house, is to ask those kind of knowledge holders who have the very, very exquisite history, but that's not written down typically. And I worry if we're not looking at that aspect, we may be missing a larger history of this problem. You know, every time an elder dies, they say we've lost a library of information. And if you live out here, that is so true.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really good example of how making sure that people are including local knowledge and qualitative information in addition to quantitative information
Absolutely.
is really important for background, and to make sure, especially if you're an outsider to a community, that the work you're doing is on the right track and pertinent to the local community.
And tribally approved.
Mm-hmm.
To add another detail, it's at a place that from the Western science side, yeah, I can easily think of a weather scenario that would get really warm water temperatures in Shishmaref Inlet. So that makes sense. But what stuck with me about that story with Gay was this was not a secret. Elders in Shishmaref knew this place. They knew the name. They knew what it meant. It's within the community knowledge. This was not some special secret. Folks in Shishmaref were well aware of this.
How might the public health surveillance system in coastal Alaska be further supported to monitor marine wildlife for harmful algal toxic bloom exposure to protect local communities?
Alaska's coast is vast. We have more coastline than the rest of the United States combined. Out here, we rarely have any services provided. So people have survived and thrived, not just survived, thrived. For in this region, I would say we know 5,000 years of occupation of St. Lawrence Island, for example, and probably more than that. So for 5,000 years, how do you survive? Thrive. You are expert. And like I said earlier, that physical, the behavioral, the climate, all of that expertise is from years and years and years of doing, honestly, the scientific method, repeated observations to make a prediction for the future. If you want to know where to go, be successful to harvest a bearded seal, you just don't head out in a boat and hope you find a bearded seal. You know the time of year. You know what the bearded seal eats. So you know exactly where to go. You also know the health because there's no one out here to save your life or to teach you or to monitor health. So for eons, that's how we all survived. People here all really want to help. In this region, in the Bering Strait region, we are seawater sampling or trying to get seawater sampling and awareness that you can sample your seawater, send it into NOAA. Many of the entities here, tribal and health, are working towards getting a seawater sampling lab if that's possible, so we can get those samples into this regional hub. If we had a systematic, and the managers of marine mammals, the research agencies for marine mammals, for fish, for other federally managed species, in the regional communication hubs for Western and Northern Alaska, there's only about 6. And if you add them all up from Unalaska to Utqiagvik, those 6 hub communities are dealing with about 140 tribes, all on their own. And then we're all communicating up and down the coast.
Anyone can keep an eye on what the sea ice is doing, where is there sea ice, where isn't there, what are the ocean temperatures, how do they relate to normal. All of that is publicly available. And I would think if you're concerned about something that has that environmental component and part of your job is being alert for problems, building that into your routine seems like a pretty low-hanging fruit to do.
And I would follow up with, you cannot work in a vacuum. It is about communicating. It is teamwork. You want to make sure that you're working with the tribal government of a community and communicate, because the information you may be learning in your little research project, whatever it is, if you're not sharing it, we're not hearing it. And we need to know immediately what you're finding because people up and down the coast have such a better understanding holistically of the whole environment that your piece of data may actually let people know, oh, shoot, we need to be looking for this, or we need to be looking for this here. So teamwork makes the dream work.
What advice do you have for early career epidemiologists and others looking to work on One Health research?
Do it. Do it. Seriously, there is so much change going on. We need more out here. We need more services. We need more people who understand the One Health perspective. I would say go for it.
I would just say Alaska is a place where there's a lot of opportunity for this. You know, think about the difference if you're going clamming on Puget Sound versus if you're going clamming at Nilchik. Puget Sound, there's going to be signs up. You know, if there's any problems, someone is going to tell you. In Alaska, no one is going to tell you. There is so much opportunity. There's so much need here, whether it's epidemiology, public health, in every field, because as Gay said, we're very much, especially in rural Alaska, on our own. There's so much opportunity and so much opportunity to do good and help people.
And I would add, the risks are so great now. We didn't worry about avian influenza, but we have it in our land animals and our birds. Here in the Bering Strait region, we've shown that. We have the most massive toxic bloom of Alexandrium nationwide. We went from 0 to 600 on that threat. We have other problems as well. We also have the animals who are experiencing a really big change in their environment. So there's risks, real risks to human health, There are real risks to wildlife health. There's also other risks associated with the change. We've got large vessel traffic, commercial fisheries, big commercial fisheries are moving north. We are transboundary in the Bering Strait region with our Russian neighbors, and communication is at a low right now for geopolitical reasons, though we share these stocks. So we have multiple issues that are coming out of this warming. Harmful algal blooms is just one, but know that if you're a student for epidemiology, there's plenty of work for you, that we need you out here. We need the services that epidemiologists can provide, and we need them to understand rural, coastal, western, and northern Alaska.
Thank you both for joining me and for sharing your insights related to One Health epidemiology.